I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Monique Roffey. She was born in Trinidad and raised there and in Britain. She's a novelist and memoirist. She's distinguished herself as, I believe, an extraordinary writer. She's published 4 very different novels and 1 erotic memoir called With the Kisses of His Mouth, which bravely charts the disintegration of a relationship. It's a very honest and detailed portrayal of the shock of betrayal when her partner is discovered to be having an affair with another woman. She leaves him immediately, and the shock waves of this trauma reverberates through her psyche for several years. She processes the pain through sexual discovery that ultimately heals and connects her to a deeper consciousness that opens up a new way of being in the world for her. Her erotic novel, The Tryst, was published last year, and it's a work of great lyric beauty and primal energy. In it, Roffey explores what happens when a couple, Jane and Bill, welcome Lilith, depicted in mythology as a sexually wanton demon. They welcome Lila into their home with explosive consequences. Lila is based on Adam's first wife, Lilith, depicted in mythology as a sexually wanton demon. The writer and broadcaster Badisha describes The Tryst as wild and witching, at once contemporary and atavistic, with an anarchic sexual energy running through it and a startling frankness, not only about sex, but about love and relationships, gender and power. It is a dangerous and consuming read. Monique's first novel, Sundog, 2002, was a magic realist tale set in a West London deli. 3 of her novels have been set in Trinidad. The White Woman on the Green Bicycle, 2010, is about a disintegrating marriage and other things, as well as long-held secrets, and it was shortlisted for the Orange Prize and the Encore Award. In 2014, she published House of Ashes, which was inspired by the failed 1990 coup in Trinidad. It was shortlisted for both the Costa Fiction Award and the OCM Bocas Award. This was followed by Archipelago, inspired by the flooding of her brother's house in Trinidad. In this novel, a father and daughter leave behind their flooded home and take to the seas. It's described as an ecological novel, and it is equally a story about a father-daughter relationship. It won the OCM Bocas Award for Caribbean Literature and was shortlisted for the Orion Award. Monique is also a lecturer on the MFA in the novel at Manchester Metropolitan University and a tutor for the Norwich Writers' Centre. In Trinidad, she has been an active advocate for emerging writers on the island, setting up the St. James Writers' Room in 2014 and leading workshops and writing retreats. She divides her time between the East End of London and Port of Spain. So Monique's going to read from her work, then we're going to have a conversation, and then she's going to read for some more work, and then we're going to open up to questions from the audience. So I'd like you to welcome Monique Roffey.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you, Bernadine, thank you, British Council, for inviting me. And when I was being introduced earlier, this whole idea of now speaking about gender and sexuality, it feels quite incredible and amazing to me that that I'm here to talk in a much more thoughtful and considered way, because it's amazing to me that I've written 2 books about sex and sexuality, and I can't really understand how these books happen. They didn't happen consciously. I didn't set out to think I'm going to explore gender and sexuality ever. When I was in my late 30s, I was really unhappy about my sexual life for many, many reasons, all sorts of reasons, and I began writing this book. And it's a work of fiction. So I'm 52 now, so that's a long time ago. And somewhere in my notebooks, I have the opening lines or scribbled down somewhere, and more than the opening lines. And this was the book. I was sort of writing my second novel, which ended up in the bin. But this was leaking out, and it was my secret. and it was my secretly bad sex life. Or I didn't really understand what was wrong with my sex life at the time. I didn't really know anything about sex or sexuality, and I was in my 30s then. But this book was leaking out, and it leaked out, and it was full of sex, and it was full of secret, and it was full of shame, and I didn't know what to do with it. So it followed me around on many computers, hard drives, floppy disks, etc. And it was published in July of this year, so it took me over a decade to figure out, write, and then publish, and here it is. But in the meantime, so I started writing about sex sort of covertly and privately and quietly, and here it is. So I started with this, and then, so I had this dramatic breakup, and a year or two after the breakup, I was introduced to all sorts of people, tantric sex workshop leaders and various people. But by then I'd sort of had this breakup, and I was sort of, someone said to me, you feel, it's like you've been shot by a cannon out into the stratosphere. And so I would say for quite a long time post this breakup, I was in an altered state of consciousness or something, and I went kind of mad. And in those years, I began to try and explore why I wasn't happy with my sexual life. It just wasn't good enough. And so I had all these adventures, and of course I'm a writer, so I took notes for years about all the crazy things that I was doing in order to try and understand myself. Because, I mean, I would say that, I've got lots to say, I'll say it later to you. Well, maybe I'll say it later to you. But so over a course of several years, it's now a decade of sexual seeking, self-development, blah, 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 everything, all sorts of things. I feel different about sex and sexuality now. And these books sort of go together like Russian dolls. One's inside the other, one sits inside the other. They go together, and they're very different to anything else I've done, all my other books. So when you write novels, they're sort of part of high culture and the head and higher chakras, and you get a lot of esteem, and it's all good, and you can be a university lecturer, and they're all good, and it's like, yay, tick, it's all good. See, literature, it's all good. But when you write about sex, it comes down the spectrum into the lower chakras, very edgy, very dodgy, you could lose your career. Should you put your name on it? Full of shame, are you kidding? I mean, I'm going to read a few things and you'll see what I'm talking about. So then all of a sudden, you're in the realm of very unsafe for the good of yourself and your career. And, I think Kerry was talking about slut shaming and fat shaming and this shaming and that shaming. You're in the realm of where you should really keep quiet and shut up. But I didn't. So not only was I having these adventures, but I was taking notes. And then at some point, I put my pen down when I had a lot of notes. I had this breakup, and my relationship had been celibate, and now I was doing these crazy things. I thought, I want to write about it all. And I did. And I published it. So then I wrote this book. So I started the Tryst. Then I wrote and published this, and then I finished the Tryst. They sort of sandwiched in between. And I just want to say something about, at the time, it was about 2006, so about a decade ago, and there was this woman called Zoe Margolis who had a blog at the time. It was called Girl with the One Track Mind. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. And her name was Abby Lee at the time, and she had millions and millions of people, readers on her blog, Girl with the One Track Mind. And she was anonymous, and she was amazing what she was writing, and I was one of her readers. And then she wrote a book of the blog, and I have a vivid memory of post-breakup at Paddington Station picking up this book, and I think I must have read half of it standing there in the bookshop. I was just like, turning the pages going, oh my God, this is it, this is what I must do, I get this, this is me, I want this. And anyway, I think about a week later, she was outed, and lost her anonymity by another woman, obviously paid by a man. She was set on by another woman. And that really was quite tragic to sort of see and witness, and I've spoken to Zoe since, and I know there's a huge impact on her. So in the light of the fact that so many women who want to write about sex and sexuality, they try the anonymous route, get outed, often by other women, I thought, fuck it, I'm going to put my name on the cover. It's Monique Roffey who's written this book, and I'm really happy to say that my career has survived all of this, and I still teach at university, and I'm Dr. Roffey, and so I'm very sort of feel as if I made the right leap. I leapt into owning up to everything that I've ever done and said, and all of that. So anyway, I won't talk much longer. I'll just read a couple of pieces from my memoir, and read from the translator. So, as I said, I sort of put myself in the place, I put myself in the path of every possible experience I could find, really, in order to work out my sexual tastes, self, identity, everything. And this is just one of the adventures, or one of the places one of the things I went for. So I went to work with a tribe called the Deer Tribe, and it comes out of America, out of Arizona, and they have a system of working with sexuality called Kadushka, and they have a system of trainings called Coup trainings, and I met this man who was part of the tribe, and he became a partner and a lover and a friend on and off, and an influence, and he's very much part of this book, and he took me into this shamanic, neo-shamanic American experience. So I'll just read a bit about my Coup training. That second afternoon, we were to find out about our genital types. This was demonstrated first on the wheel, and then on a flip chart, and then via photographs of anonymous genitals. The teachings passed down to the Deer Tribe claim that there are 9 different genital types, 8 of which are associated with a specific animal. The 9th type are dancing men or dancing women. According to the Deer Tribe, around 50% of all women are in the center of the wheel, and these they call dancing women. These women, the teachings say, have their clitoris placed quite high up above the entrance to the vagina, and their G-spot is also deep and hidden by a fold of tissue. Therefore, just in-out thrusting doesn't give them pleasure. They need a patient and skillful lover to bring them to orgasm, one who will deliver a lot of manual and oral stimulation as well. All too often, these women do not have the luck of finding such a lover, especially post-childbirth. They give up on themselves and their partners. They are physically and spiritually drying up. They turn to other options, settling into celibate relationships that, or they self-pleasure, or they turn to their own sex, other women. This made me feel sad and thoughtful. It seemed an eerily plausible explanation for so much female dissatisfaction, and for why so many women claim they don't orgasm, don't even like sex. They need careful, loving attention. They don't want to be hard fucked by a man with a big cock. Very few women do, is my guess. The Deer Tribe say these teachings have existed for thousands of years, and the modern-day teachers use photographs to show Coup students, but these in turn have been verified by the elders. What amazed me was the detail they went into, what particular type of woman's outer and inner lips looked like, where her G-spot was located, where her clitoris was, high or low, what a woman's secretions smelt like, sweet or bitter, if she was hot or cool inside, if she ejaculated, if she had a tilted cervix, if she liked to have intercourse while menstruating, if she was noisy or quiet during orgasm, the depth of her vagina. It was also fascinating to discover what kind of women were deepest and made the best porn stars, deer, which women were the natural hunters, wolves, foxes, and cats, which women were always wet, sheep, which women were shallow, buffalo. We learnt that genital types and personality types are also linked. Nisarg said he thought I was probably a wolf. This was the great hunter of the female pack, the big extrovert. Qui, moi? The Indian Kama Sutra has similar types of animal names for genitals, but these are much less sophisticated, relating to size only, 3 types for each sex. In Kadushka, there are 8 animal names for male and female genitalia. For women, you can be a wolf, an antelope, a deer, a fox, a sheep, a cat, a buffalo, or a bear. For men, a horse, an elk, a deer, a ram, a coyote, a dog, a bear, or a pony. Which type was I? There was only one way to find out. Rose drew the curtains. She arranged a chair in the centre of the room. The women formed a circle around the chair, and the men formed a circle around the women. Rose went first. She wasn't wearing any underwear. She hitched up her skirt, and she sat on the chair, and she opened her legs. I am an antelope, she said. We all leant forward. One by one, every woman slipped off her knickers and sat on the chair, and one by one, Batty and Rose, who sat on the floor on either side of the chair, judged our genital types. There was one bear woman, but the rest were either wolves or antelopes. Antelopes are full of energy and like to jump about. I went near the end, and I can't remember if I was nervous. As with all my adventures, it was curiosity that pushed me forwards. I peeled off my knickers and I took a deep breath. I sat on the chair and I parted my legs. I think I'm a wolf too, I said. Batty and Rose leant forward. Rose frowned. No, I don't think so. Really? I murmured, and I spread my legs wider. Ah, said Batty, you see those little ears? I certainly couldn't see any ears. I couldn't see myself at all from that vantage point, but he seemed very sure, even affectionate in his judgment, and Rose nodded. You're a fox, said Batty. I felt a flush of pride. Me? A fox? It was the nicest thing anyone had said to me in a long time. You're a fox. Of course I was. I beamed and closed my legs. Thank you, I murmured. I was a hunter, yes, but a smaller creature than the wolf. Cuter, too. Fox women are on the southeast of the medicine wheel, in between sheep and deer. We have a hood over our clitoris, and this is clearly visible, and the inner lips, when open, curve a little and are serrated. We are quite deep. The G-spot isn't spongy but smooth, 3 centimeters inside the vagina. Fox women are quick and fast movers, along with antelope, deer, and cats. We can do long and short build-ups to orgasm and have fast or long-rolling climaxes. We hunt at night and are private, family-orientated people. We can be loners, and we like to give our lovers breakfast. These were the facts that Rose had given us earlier. I dislike being easily typified, yet these facts are not only complex but accurate. Knowing what your genital type is helpful, according to Rose. You can explain yourself to lovers, who you are and what you're like, inside and out. I was grateful for the information. I look forward to telling the next man that I met that I was a fox woman. Anyway, so... Anyway, shall I read another? Yeah, keep reading. Okay, so that was sort of a fun, funny, weird, incredible, fun bit. So, I mean, not everything was fun and funny, and some things were really edgy and very difficult. I took loads of risks. This was 2006, so long before Tinder. Tinder's now really mainstream. Long before millennials, who are now sort of using different pronouns and who are much more poly-friendly and poly-active. So I was sort of like, strange, midlife, in crisis. I didn't have a mobile phone. I was using something called Craigslist to meet men early on. I just wanted to meet loads of men just for sex, no strings attached sex. And I did, and I was quite good at it too. And it was really interesting. And it was weird. I mean, I just, when I look at this memoir now, sometimes I just shake my head. And I think, God, were you on crack or something? What was going on? And I was taking risks that I don't think I would take now. I don't necessarily think I would, recommend. But, these days, everyone is using Tinder. Everyone is sex dating. And I've got a lot to say about that, and I'm not necessarily think it's a good thing, to be honest. But in those days, I was, I guess I was just guinea pigging myself, really, and letting myself, I was quite numb as well, and I was overwhelmed with grief of this breakup, so I didn't really care too much. There was some self-care, but not really, even then I sort of thought even getting hurt might be interesting. I was so sort of objective. Anyway, so I was meeting all these men. Generally, things went really well. I won't read any of the good ones, because I'm going to read something that went a little bit wrong. The gay cowboy. One of my dates felt bad, like a one-night stand from my youth. A one-night stand gone very wrong indeed. This was the gay cowboy. In response to my bookish ex-stripper advert, it was really fun writing all these ads, it's hilarious. A man sent me a very confident, if not cocky, email, a picture of himself in a cowboy hat. He was handsome and tanned with an open face, and it was the one time I ever pinged off an outright yes to anyone. We met 2 nights later at the Doreen Celeste on Upper Street, and within minutes we were drinking wine and kissing on the sofa. He was skinnier and older than his photo suggested. He told me rather too quickly that he was loaded. He worked in the music business. Let's call him Fred. So, he said, staring hard at me, how are we going to conduct this affair? Affair, I replied. You and I, how does this work? Let's just get through this drink first, I suggested. An alpha male already trying to control things? Yes. It was a rash decision to go home with him, but I did. We jumped into a black cab and sped back to his designer home in Camden. In the kitchen, we kissed, and soon I was naked and sitting on the kitchen countertop. And then we were upstairs in his white designer bedroom on his bed. I don't know what to do with you, he said. I'm cockshy. I think I'd gone mad by then. I was capable of being wildly forward. Do nothing, I said, just sit back and watch. I lay on the chaise longue in one corner of the room. I spread my legs and began to pleasure myself. He came closer and gasped. His eyes glittered as he gazed down at me. You're so beautiful like that. It was a moment of sheer exhibitionism on my part. I loved it, and so did he. I love men watching me pleasure myself. It's an awesome sight to see a woman laid out so open and in touch with herself. He reached for his camera. Please stop, I said. There were to be no pictures of me, ever. We moved to the bed. He had an agile body and a thick, meaty cock. We fooled around, but something had happened. I'd taken the wind out of his sails. We lay down on the bed, and we talked about the very moments we were sharing and why he couldn't get hard. This is all too much. It's all wrong, I said, this no-strings-attached sex. Yeah, he agreed. It's all too quick. There's been no build-up, no fantasy between us. We're strangers. Yeah. We don't care about each other at all. I know. I think fantasy is needed. It was a moment of epiphany lying there in that man's bed. Fantasy is a necessary ingredient for the build-up of desire. Without it, we just aren't really stirred. So we abandoned the idea of sex. Instead, we went downstairs in kimonos and ate a meal he prepared in his kitchen. Duck pate on mini pita breads with cranberry jam and a squeeze of lime. We drank designer floral tea from a Japanese teapot. He had many jars of exotic tea leaves. We talked about life and death. We were both sleepy. It was all okay until then. It was after that things began to get edgy. When we returned to his bed, instead of wanting to sleep, he suddenly wanted to fuck. He produced a bottle of lube and put on a Supertramp record. Shit, I thought. I'd now entirely lost the spirit of things. I hated Supertramp. But I let him fuck me. I think he was trying to catch up to get what he wanted out of the date. And so we fucked, and it was rough and empty. Get on your knees, he said at one point, and his voice was cruel. And I didn't say no. I didn't say fuck off. I'd put myself in this place. I wasn't in actual danger, but I allowed him to fuck me, and I did something I didn't want to do, and I hadn't done that in years. And I don't think I'll ever have a moment like this in my life ever again. It was an act from my distant past, from a time when I was less conscious, a lesser individual, from my early 20s, from those years when I wasn't in possession of myself. In the end, I did stop him, but not soon enough. And we lay next to each other all night without a word, and he kept putting my hand on his cock, which was huge and hard, and I kept moving it away, and we lay there for hours in warped, muted silence. At dawn, I got up and I found my clothes, and I looked down at him. "You can let yourself out," he smirked. I went down the stairs, out into the cold dawn air, and almost ran to the train station. This was the worst of all my dates. Get on your knees. But I'd got what I wanted too, in a way. I got hurt again. Yeah, so I keep reading? Yeah? You want to hear one more small bit? Yeah, a little bit, okay. So there's lots of this going on, and it was there was all sorts of stuff going on, really. I was, I was heartbroken and grief-stricken, and I had been in this relationship that was, you talk about the cliched soulmate. This person had been my, twinned universe, my soulmate, but our sex lives just were not, we were incompatible, nothing was happening. And so I was really heartbroken. So this isn't just a sexual quest. It's also a story about a breakup and a love affair. And eventually, over the years that followed this breakup, me and this man kept in touch. And years later, and one day we met, and he said, "Look, I think we should get divorced." And I said, "Well, we're not married. We were never married. What do you mean?" And he said, "You know what I mean." He said, "We need to break up properly." And I said, I was like, So anyway, by that point, I'd been doing tons of shamanic, wookie, running around and doing all sorts of things. So I thought, okay, all right, I'll give you your divorce. And so I said to him, I'd like to do a ritual. I'd like to have a ritual divorce, a hand parting. And he was a bit like, oh no. Anyway, we did do this crazy ritual in a stone circle in a field with druids and stone bowls and basins, and it was really amazing, actually, and chanting into the universe that we'd separated. And it was just amazing, and it was really incredible, people witnessing us, and and we buried these rings in the ground, and there's a stone circle on the Welsh borders that's got 2 rings in the ground that are our rings, and anyway. So we did this big breakup, proper breakup. And then about a month later, I went on a tour of the south of France where it's said that Mary Magdalene ended up. I don't know if any of you are aware of this myth or legend of Mary Magdalene. So the idea being that after Christ was crucified, Mary Magdalene ended up in a boat, a small craft, with a handful of surviving followers, and sailed into the Mediterranean and ended up in the south of France, where she proselytized and preached to and converted everybody to Christianity, which is one of the reasons why French Catholicism is where it all started, with Magdalene preaching and spreading the word of Christ. And she ended up in a cave in the Massif Central, which is like a huge bone going across France. And there's a cave, and this is where Magdalene is supposed to have ended up and spent 30 years meditating and proselytizing and preaching. And she lived up there, and this cave's still there. And there are relics of Magdalene all over the south of France. There's a head, a skull, bones, and then there's the whole Holy Blood and Holy Grail, conspiracy ideas about Christ having a son, all of this is, well documented. But not many people know about Magdalene, and then the Da Vinci Code came along. And so there is this cave, and there is this monastery in a rock face, in this big mountain. And it's not really a mountain, it's like something jolted up from the earth in one go, and just arose. And it's all rock, and there's a small order of Dominican monks who guard the cave. and there's a little monastery in the rock, and there's 6 of them, and they walk up every day to tend the cave, and it's been there for hundreds of years. And so Magdalene isn't the Virgin Mary, she's the other dark, shadowy woman in Christ's life. So before the Da Vinci Code, there was nobody visiting this cave. Very few people knew about it. And there weren't very many pilgrims. But these monks would go up every day and put flowers, and there's a little chapel in the cave. And then after the Da Vinci Code, there were just suddenly many more pilgrims coming, many more people aware of Magdalene. So again, I met all these interesting people, and one of them was a man called John Hawkin, who is a tantric sex teacher and a shaman, and he's a very knowledgeable man, and he was going to the south of France on a pilgrimage through all these castles in the south, Cathar castles, in search of the holy sacred feminine in Christianity, I said, I'm coming. And I'm famously a terrible camper, but I had this little Tesco camping, pop-up tent, and we went. It was amazing. So about a month after this crazy shamanic hand parting, I ended up going on pilgrimage to this cave, where Mary Magdalene is said to have spent the rest of her life, the last years of her life. So I'll just read a bit from this pilgrimage. The trail was steep. It was a 45-minute climb up a zigzag path cut into the rock. There were benches and 1 or 2 drinking fountains on the way up. Not many people were on the path. There were a few other pilgrims. Somewhere in the sheer cliff face there was a cave, but it was invisible from the path. What was visible, not just from the path, but even from the road below, was some windows in the rock. A whole building had somehow been chiseled from solid stone. This was a monastery where Dominican monks, the guardians of the cave, were housed. I learnt that there was another monastery at the foot of the massif, nestled into the trees, which was a home to about 6 monks. This small community took it in turns to walk up the cliff face every day in order to keep the cave safe. Magdalene was the patron saint of the Dominican order, and they'd been guarding the cave for hundreds of years. I wanted to make pilgrimage. I kept on alone and put 1 foot in front of the other, surprising myself by how sure and steady I was on the sheer path, like a little pack mule. I was well ahead of Gabby and the Czech women, who were making the pilgrimage together, bonding with each other, and by proxy with the feminine. I walked and marvelled at the cliffs, how they seemed to shoot straight upwards from the ground, as if the massif had been formed in one great jolt, a violent thrusting upwards from the earth. The rock was bone grey and bald. Black trees rose up from the dense green verges beside the path. My head emptied. My body toiled onwards, up and up. I didn't pray or think too hard. I didn't think of my ex, even though I wore the same crumpled silver cowboy hat I'd worn at the 4 Stones in Kinnerton the day of our divorce. I liked the loneliness of the path. I realised I'd been treading alone on a path for a very long time. It was what I'd chosen. It suited me. I liked aloneness. I liked the melancholia and the romance and the hardiness it entailed. Yes, if not a writer, I could choose a long life of another type of solitude. I could give up sex. I could become a nun. I could choose to live in a house in a cave in a rock and guard a great woman's reputation, a woman like Magdalene. My head swirled with noble and self-righteous fantasies. I've been writing my own story, my creation myth, all my life. What did I have in common with Magdalene? Levantine looks, long wild hair. I'd always been surly and willful and lustful. I'd also had an epic love affair. Did I want to defend not just Magdalene, but my own reputation? Is that why I had come here? Then there was an opening in the canopy of trees, and the cliff face revealed itself. I could see a row of perfectly square windows, the small, neat monastery cut into the flat face of the rock. I remember a Daphne du Maurier short story, Monte Verita, about such a monastery in a cliff face high in the Swiss Alps. In the story, women of a nearby village are called to the monastery and they disappear inside. There they live forever and never grow old. Would I disappear too into the cave and spend a decade meditating and levitating? I rounded a corner and found a further cluster of buildings cut into the cliff. Another corner and 3 wooden crosses loomed. On one was a statue of the emaciated and crucified Christ. Round yet another corner was an open square. In the square, there was a statue of Mary Magdalene kneeling, and spread across her lap was the half-naked body of the dead, half-dead Jesus Christ. What was I supposed to think? Here was a statue of a woman, a young woman, kneeling, with her face turned to heaven in agony and despair, and across her was draped the body of a young dead man. Her lover? Opposite the statue there was a wall with stained glass windows and a huge oak door, and behind the door was the cave. How on earth was this monastery built up here so high? Donkeys, pulleys, baskets on ropes. A man appeared in a flowing white monk's habit. He was young and dark-haired and studious-looking in his thick-framed glasses. I nodded at him, and he nodded back politely. I walked up the steps to the thick oak door. It was then that my heart began to pound. Was it the exertion of walking up the path? I was breathless and slightly asthmatic, recovering from the climb, but my stomach was swirling, and there was a churning in my gut. I stood on the threshold looking in. It was immense and dark, and the air inside was cool and still and spiced with incense. It was a huge cavern in the rock. I was standing on solid ground, and yet this cave was high up in the sky. Tears came, sudden and from nowhere. I was spooked. I crossed myself. It seemed the right thing to do. I crossed myself and bowed my head. And yes, and then it came, an overwhelming feeling of sadness and sweet shame for my sins and for some kind of inexpressible love, the love I had for my ex, an old love now part of me. I was immobile and unable to take a step into the cave. And yet standing there, I was in a state of peace. Shit, she's here, was what came to me. She's here, she's really here. I stepped forward and I sensed a great gust of power. I felt it then, the love of a great mother, a huge, all-enveloping presence. My breath caught in my chest. I wasn't sure if my legs would carry me. I trembled as I entered the cave. Power places are well known. Earth chakras are places of sacred space on earth, portals of another time. Here was one. I couldn't casually wander around. There was a small chapel inside the cave, and I made straight for a pew in front of the altar. I sat and put my hands on my heaving chest, tried to steady myself. My breath was slow and laboured. Breathe, I kept saying to myself, keep breathing. Tears were streaming down my face. Breathe. I sat for a long time trying to get my breath. I sat and I stared at the altar in wonder. Another cross, another statue of Mary Magdalene, long flowing hair, her face wrapped with heartbreak, kneeling under the crucified Christ. Her loss, her anguish carved on her face. It was all around, a shrine to the despair of losing a lover. She'd lost her love and had come here to pray for 30 years. Here she retreated, living on food brought down by angels, the legend says. I held my heart and I sat and I felt utterly lost and yet at home up there in the cave in the sky. Visions came of the time my ex, he kicked his leg high in the shoe shop on Upper Street, so high his moccasin flew out the door and whizzed straight past somebody walking by. Memories of waking every morning to see his head on the pillow next to me, his adult face turned slack and unlined, so that I'd seen him every day as a boy. I hadn't been able to extinguish this love. Stronger than death is love, says the woman in the Song of Songs. I'd come here to offer it up, leave it behind and meet with myself, or with me, another me, which I was trying to cast off. I think I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Monique. That was absolutely extraordinary to hear the quality of the writing, but also the experiences that you went through that you were able to write about. So you went through a traumatic. It's on. Yeah. So you went through a traumatic breakup, which I think people who haven't read the book don't know that it was. You discovered he was having an affair, and then literally left him the next day, I think. So that was really quite brutal. And then you went on this journey of self-discovery. And it seems to me in the book that you get to understand yourself so well. And a lot of it is through sort of physical exchange, sexuality, spirituality as well, in a way that I feel most of us don't know ourselves. I mean, when I was reading the book, I was just shocked at how honest and brave and exposing it felt to be writing all this stuff about, you know, who you are and your relationship to sex and so on. And I don't think most people don't do that. But also that through that sexual exploration, you really understand yourself. And I think it showed with this final piece that you read that you had an epiphany and you constantly coming to revelations about who you are and so on. So I think just from the angle of understanding sort of a woman, a sort of, if you like, no, we don't want to say spurned woman, but we want to understand a woman's psychology in relation to her body, in relation to her relationships, in relationship to her past, in relationship to her sexual permission to give herself sexual freedom without judgment. The book works on all those levels. But also you do write about the partner in quite detail, and it's, you know, you could say it's not always flattering the ways in which he's described, especially physically. So could you talk about the decisions you made about writing his story with also, I think, perhaps, obviously it's one side of the story, but with such honesty?
Yeah, well, gosh, that's a big one. Well, first of all, about him, I mean, his physicality is extraordinary. He is an extraordinary person. You don't just, he's the kind of person who walks into a room and almost everybody would turn to see him. He's 6'3", and he's a performer and a comedian and a writer, and he is an amazing person. You sort of behold him. You look at him and you go, oh. So I couldn't really pass up on describing him physically, because it was the reason why he was, I was deeply in love with this person, and his physicality was so impressive. It was so part of, and I talk about him being ugly. Well, in a way, that's quite accurate. I mean, some people would say that, but he was a genuinely astonishing person to see, and he was part of everything. Why? I mean, looking back, could I have chopped the first 50 pages off? Maybe. And could I have added 50 pages? Yes, I could, because I think if I could critique this book, I would say the story arc, I ended it here, there was more to come, somebody died. There was, I loved again, somebody died. But, when I look back, I really don't want to sort of talk publicly about the exchange. We had an exchange, me and this man, about permission. And that exchange, I felt, was honoured by him. And anyway, I don't really want to talk about how complicated it got. Enough to say that we are on talking terms. But yeah, it was, I never named him. And early on, he had been writing a memoir too. When we broke up dramatically over this affair, he went off and started writing something also about pilgrimages and about failure and about, he'd been married a couple of times. So he also tried to write our story in a different way, more about him. And when he got stuck and his memoir broke down, and I'd written a novel called The White Woman on the Green Bicycle, I sort of checked in with him and I said, look, if you're not going to write this book, I'm going to write this book. And he said, go ahead, just don't name me. And I never have. So I feel as though it's a book that it didn't sell tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of copies like other memoirs. It hasn't gone into the stratosphere in terms of sales, but it is really very become part of my personal iconography and his, and we're linked by this book, and it's a good book.
It is. It's a wonderful book.
I'm proud of it. Yeah, I'm proud of it.
And do you feel that if you hadn't have written the book, you wouldn't have come to that level of self-awareness? And as you were making notes, as you know, while you were having all these sexual experiences, were you aware that you were at some point having the experiences in order to write the book?
No, not really, because I'd been having these experiences for 2 or 3 years and taking notes. Because it was just too crazy, it was just wild, you know. I mean, as a writer, I think any writer would be like, I'm just going to write this down. And it was because I suddenly realized I had all these diaries, like a stack of them, and I've been doing all these tantra workshops. And then I thought to myself, oh, I've got a book. It wasn't like, I'm going to write a book and do this crazy journey. The journey was very up and running and in progress, and I'd been diarizing. And then I looked at my stack of diaries, and I thought, oh, okay, now I'm going to write about it, yeah. So the realization to write a book came about halfway through the journey. But I guess, and also, the book was published in 2011, so that's quite a long time ago. And the journey is ongoing. I'm still in tantric sex workshops. I still have very much I have a teacher, I have a community, I have all sorts of friends, lovers, partners who are part of this community. So it's ongoing. It's been a decade of this, yeah.
But I mean, it seems to me that you fully understand yourself in the way that you do because you wrote the book. That the complexity of everything and kind of analysing it and sort of processing it is part of the writing, and that without writing the book, you wouldn't have gone through the process in the same way.
Probably, yeah. It's been valuable. It's been part of, it's like the convergence between life and, like, you know, art and life came together, and I made something, and it fed back to me. Yeah, it talked to me. And also, I think I've got so much to say about memoirs, you know. Do you want me to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, I'm a novelist, and I would always say I'm a novelist. But now that I've written this memoir, what I know is that when I'm 80 and I look back on my life, that this memoir I'll be probably the most proud of. And I think that, you know, people have very black and white reactions to my literature, my novels. It's yes or no. They either like it or they don't, or in fact, all can be quite indifferent. But and you get reviews, and the reviewers either like it or they don't. It's very yes or no. But with my memoir, I mean, I've had the most incredible feedback. Somebody wrote to me last year and said, thank you for revolutionizing my life. I've got married to a tantric woman, and I wouldn't have got married without reading your book. So the memoir has this sort of act of reportage and self-examination and just sort of reportage and just going out there and just going, I'm going to bring back my findings, has actually changed other people's lives. And whenever I go out in this tantric community, I run into people all the time who say, I've read your book, it changed my life. And I'm like, oh. Like, novels don't do that. Novels do not change people's lives in quite the same way. So I might even write another one, I don't know. But it has been like the most important book I've written so far.
What about the critical reception to the book? Can you talk a bit about how they responded?
Well, it was really well received, generally, across the board, and I'm really happy about that. And then, you know, this is really a sad thing, but a young female reporter who's really famous, and she's known for her hatchet jobs, just attacked it savagely down, you know, and attacked me down to my dental records. And it was horrifying, really. It's a horrifying experience to be ridiculed in the Sunday Times, a couple of million readers. And it just felt shocking. It felt this woman-on-woman attack. So it's not really a woman-on-woman attack. A man put her up to it. You know, the editor was a man who said, go on, you know, that's what she does. And it felt really unnecessary, and shocking. It felt shocking. I was slut-shamed. The book isn't that bad. You know, it's really not bad at all. And she just, her line was, Monique, you know, get over it. You're whining, get over it. Get over yourself and get over him. and, get a life, was basically the attack. And I was like, yeah, okay, it's fair enough.
But the book isn't a whining book in any way at all. It's a book of exploration. Yeah, so I know who you're talking about, and I read the piece, which I thought was it was just sensationalist.
But it was, when I looked at it, I was horrified. I was so horrified. I've never seen anything so horrible written about anyone, let alone me. I was like, I can't believe that's been written by anyone, and it's about me. I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, how can you live writing that stuff? Don't you know about the laws of karma? Don't you think that it's going to come back, bite you in the arse? If you hurt people again and again and again for a living, one day it's going to bite you back.
Yeah. So with the Tryst, it is, as you said, it's a book that's a sort of sister book to With the Kisses of His Mouth. And it feels like, to me, that Lila is really the personification of the sexual person who took your partner away from you. No?
No, I wouldn't say
okay.
That. No, yeah.
So, can you talk a bit about it, how you see it?
Well, it's a book about a triangle, one man and two women. And the two women are really one woman, and they're split. There's the whore and the mother, or there's the virgin and the whore, and it's about the classic Judeo-Christian split. So in Judeo-Christianity, there's only two types of women, whores and mothers, and we live with that. We live with that kind of reduction and simplicity, and it's very problematic. I know I live with it. I'm now a Buddhist, but so it's a book about integration, and I think my life, I really identify with the Jane character. In my 30s, pre my explorations, I think I was very See, the book is all about, both books are about what I wanted to do, which was fulfill my potential as a sexual being. That's what I wanted to do. I had a strong sense that there was a part of me that was undeveloped and unintegrated and had not had enough fun, or had not really gone out there and had not explored the darker possibilities. And so Lila is that dark eros. So it's a split. I mean, it's really about a woman. Jane, in the end, heals and comes together. She sort of conquers the Lila character. And Lila, I think, is a bit out of balance. She's all about sex. She's very predatory. And Jane is amazingly innocent. So in the end, Jane almost like has to sort of face the dark eros and eat her, like the Ouroboros, eat her, ingest her, in order to. And in the end, she says, I've got both. I've got her now. She's in me. Went out and got my erotic self. That's what it's about.
And so you're a Caribbean British woman, or Trinidadian British, however you define yourself. Writing these two books in particular are powerful sort of testaments to sex and sexuality. How does that sit within your sort of feminist politics, and also how that plays out in the Caribbean?
What, these books?
Yeah, these books in particular.
I don't know. Do you know, it's really interesting, because people say about memoirs, I mean, at the time I thought, nobody in Trinidad will read these books. I don't know why I thought that. I thought, I'm miles away from home, no one will read these. But actually, I do come from a small place. And this book's done quite well. It's on sale. People talk to me about it at home. It's very out there. My mother used to keep the book in a bag, she used to hide it. Whereas all my other books are on, you walk into the living room and they're all sort of, in a library, she's very proud of what I do. She's ashamed of that. But, slowly, she tells me her bridge ladies. I mean, they all love it. They all say it's a great book. But I guess I'm proud of it. I also grew up. I'm 52 now. So when I started this quest, I was late 30s. So I grew up. The wind has changed. Issues around gender and sexuality, it's been it's slightly expanded. Like everyone's sort of relaxed a bit about it all. A millennial generation have come of age. Sorry, and so it's less shame. I'm less embarrassed, and it's very different from my Caribbean novels, of course. But I love them. They're part of it all, and I'm just so proud. I'm not the opposite of shamed. And yes, so there's Caribbean novels as well.
So onto your Caribbean novels. You do write male sort of driven novels as well as female driven novels. Can you talk about that and the experience of writing gender?
Well, because 2 of my Caribbean books are so close to home, so they're about they have white protagonists. They're very closely related to events that have happened in my family. So the men I'm writing about are loosely based on family members. My brother being one who lost his house in a flood, his relationship with his daughter, which is very different to my relationship with my father. And then writing about my father and my mother. If you look at all of my books, there's an orphan child. So I was, even though I've got older brothers, they were parceled off to a boarding school. I was very much an only child. My father was still part of the old Victorian male, literally made in a factory, quite a colonial, not a bad person, but not an emotionally in touch, complex person. So there was no father-daughter bonding between me and my father. So in all my books, there's a small child who is parentless, and there's a father figure, and mothers tend to be quite absent. It's all so personal. So when you say, how do I approach these, the books that are about me and my family set in the Caribbean have a really, really internal dynamic, which has got nothing to do with feminism, really. It's just me working through this whole thing about being, parentless or fatherless, and having a really personal relationship with a colonial father, white colonial man, even as the child, my colonial white man was a really personal insider's relationship. And the only book that I think I've written that has got nothing to do with my family is House of Ashes, which was a big stretch, yeah.
Yes, which is about a coup. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I could do.
You don't have to.
I know so I then wrote a book about a political situation in Trinidad. And, God, that's a big
okay, shall we leave that then? Okay.
One, yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, yes. So we're just going to go back a bit. And I'll just, it'd be interesting for people to know about how you became a writer, whether you studied creative writing, well, I know you did, and running the Arvin Foundation, Rural Retreat, and so on, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah, okay. So how did I become a writer? I think I was writing from like from before I was 10. I was writing from the word go, I used to write on the walls. I used to graffiti my bedroom, so I have memories of writing on the walls. So I was only about 3 foot high at the time, or 4 foot high, and there'd be words all over my bedroom, all over the house, and my mum would say to me, did you do that? And I'd go, no, and I was like, you're lying. You're 3 foot high, and they're 3 foot high. These words. So I used to get foiled every time. So I was writing diaries and writing stories, and I was a journalist all through my 20s. So I was making a living as a writer all through my 20s. And then I was a feature writer. I was never one of these hard-boiled news reporters, always writing soft, fluffy stuff. And then I went to Jerusalem. I got ill, and when I was 30, I came down with something called Churg-Strauss syndrome, and I was out of action for a year, hopping around on crutches, and I it's a long story, but that was life-changing, and I kind of woke up. I'd been wasting my life. I had that real epiphany where I thought, I've wasted 10 years of my life. What do I really want to do? I think I'm going to try writing novels. And all my friends were like, you must be crazy, you're kidding, you got a third-rate degree. I did get a third-rate degree, and that's very much a writer's degree. All my friends just shook their heads and thought, really? You, a writer? Do you really think you're going to be a writer? And I was just like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And I started going to creative writing classes, which is a really good thing to do if you want to write. And I then started writing properly, really quickly. I went and applied to an MA, and I did an MA, and I did a PhD, and I just ducked to water. I just took to it. And so many of my friends were astonished, absolutely astonished, like of all the people they'd met, all these Oxbridge friends, all these really clever people, all these brainy people. And I think you don't need to have read you don't need to, I've then ran an Arvon course, met so many English teachers and English students who've read everything. And I used to be the kind of kid who would just like stare at the wall for hours, just like be completely like, I don't know what I was thinking about. I was just used to sort of, and people used to catch me doing this and like talking to myself and sort of like, this dreamy, weird kid. Guess what? That's a really good thing if you want to be a writer. This kind of weird, dreamy kid became a really serious writer. And, I didn't need to have read the complete works of Shakespeare to make that kind of thing just happen. So early on, there was a lot of faffing about dreaminess, underachieving. I got very sick, death door, fatal sick. And then I pulled my socks up and I became a writer. And then at some point, I met this man who was incredibly influential. I think this man who was a writer, he showed me how to do it as well.
This is the same man?
Yeah, the same man. He showed me how tough I needed to be. He was really tough. And he looked like the Thing. I keep talking about him. He looked like the Thing. He was huge, big, bald bastard, big man. And he used to write with one hand, like and smoke. And I thought, oh, that's what writers do. They smoke and write with one hand. And I learned how to do that, and smoking away, writing with one hand, and just tough. How to go on stage and face an audience of two, and how to sort of be tough. Anyway, so I ran an Arvon Centre. We got a job together.
Just to explain that, the Arvon Foundation runs writing retreats in 3 different locations in the countryside, and they're retreats a week. People go for a week. And
5 nights and 4 days.
Sorry, 5 nights. Yeah. And so you were a centre director with the man.
Yeah. So anyway, cut long story short, me and this man had been living in a squat, in a co-op, short life housing co-op in London. And prior to that, he'd been living in a caravan. So we were like homeless, completely hand to mouth. I was working in Holloway Prison. We were just like, it was fantastic. It was bohemian. It was just like, this is what I've always wanted to do, be completely broke and write in London. And in those days, you could squat in London. And I met Anthony Gormley the other day, and he was talking about squatting in London. And he was saying, and he's roughly the same age, and he was saying there was a time when artists and writers, they were just empty houses, abandoned properties all over London. Anyway, so I'm not a country person at all. Again, it's that sort of identity thing. I'm foreign. I don't look right in the countryside. But anyway, we applied for a job as centre directors for this house in Devon, and it was amazing because we had to do a double act interview. And he's a performer. He turned up looking like a gangster, in a pinstripe suit, bald head, gold teeth, talks like that. And I was just this sweet little middle-class, nice woman, He it was bad cop, good cop, except I was the bad cop, he was the good cop. And so they just fell for us. They fell for him. And I was just, his helper. So we ran this place for 4 years, and I loved every minute of it. And it ruined our life together. And we ended up leaving in flames, yeah.
But you had different writers coming in every week.
Yeah.
So you also kind of met and listened to writers talking about the craft of writing.
And listened to everything.
3 writers every week for like 40 weeks of the year.
Yeah, for 4 years.
Yeah, for 4 years.
And yeah, so if you do a job like that, you really get to hear writers talking about their life, how they make it work financially, all the ups and downs. God, everything from elderly poets who've had no exposure whatsoever and arrived with a bag full of pamphlets and chapbooks to famous hotshots who are riding the crest of their stars in the ascendant, everybody in between. Many people know each other. Arvon was founded by poets, famously. And so, particularly with the poets, They'd all been through Arvon as students and had come back to teach. And there's like these lineages. So, you know, Neil Rollinson had been taught by somebody else who'd been taught by somebody else. And I'm part of a lineage where I think it's Angela Carter had taught Andrew Miller. Andrew Miller had a huge crush on Andrew Miller as a writer, literary crush. And he taught me. And so it's a place where lineages of writers in the last 50 years are linked and have kind of pulled each other up onto the stage and said, come on, up. And it really happens in the poetry world. And of course, alongside all these amazing stories, there were just incredible misdemeanors as well, and accidents, and you name it.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I think I'll open up now to the audience for questions.
Yeah.
We have about 15 minutes. Who would like to kick off? Yep.
Thank you. Hello. So you said about, just with this, on a technical point about writing a memoir, you said you hadn't named your ex. So I'm just wondering about all the other characters in the memoir. Did you have to go around each person and ask for permission, think of a different name, or how did that work on an ethical level for like revealing what had happened between you and the other people?
Could you translate that?
Oh, did you go around to the other people who are in the memoir and ask their permission?
Yes. Well, actually,
Sorry.
it's a really good question about memoir writing. Yes. yes, and yes. So I went about it stealthily in a number of ways. People who had like one line or cameo like, appeared for like a sentence, or had like the gay cowboy, or you know, or in a small chunk of it, I just heavily disguised these people, so there's no way. I mean, these were people who fleeted in and fleeted out. There's no way you would know who that person was. So some people were heavily disguised. People I knew, I sent chunks of work to about 40 people, and said, please read this, and tell me if I can name you. Is it okay? I was writing about people I was living with. I was writing about a baby that got born. I was writing about my circumstances as I was progressing. Tantra teachers, therapists, psychotherapists, all sorts of people walk into this book. And every single one I sent chunks of the narrative to, and had not quite a release form, but I had a paper trail. And then, so it had to be ethical. It had to be ethically, completely watertight. We also had a legal team go over it. We had a peer review. I tried to be as ethical as possible, because yes, there are lots of people who were part of this book, but really I wanted the lion's share of it to be mine. And as Bernadine says, it's really exposing, and the person who really I'm after is me. I'm the person who is taking my clothes off, you know, all the way through the book. Yeah, it's a big responsibility.
Did you in some
writing
cases,
about living people?
Did you have to rename anyone or think of a...
Yeah, renamed people. No, disguised people who, well, like I said, walk on parts, little vignettes, completely rewrote. People who were short were tall, people who were dark were blonde, you know, everybody got completely repackaged. But friends of mine gave me permission to use their real names. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. All right, thank you.
Okay, we have a question down here.
You used the word shame quite a lot early on when you were talking about initially writing about your sexuality. Could you expand, and yet clearly towards the end this is something you're very proud of.
Yeah.
Can you talk about shedding the shame, that process?
Yes, thank you. Yes, this is a really big part of writing both these books, and why The Tryst took so long is because of my deep sense of societal shame. Was just so big to try and write, like, you know, just to try and write under it and try and write through it or something. It was huge. The memoir felt, because I started the Tryst when I was 37, I started the memoir when I was 40-something. And I felt stronger with the memoir, but really struggled with it. Also struggled. And it's now years since the memoir's been published. I've grown up a bit. So now I feel a sense of immense, yes, I did it. I'll die with a smile on my face. I'll die chuckling about this book. But no, I really struggled. I was so heteronormal, middle class, white, absolutely, completely normal, nowhere near. I identify so differently now because of these experiences, and I feel much more comfortable with what I've become in a way. But God, then I used to cringe, and I used to cringe when I was writing. I couldn't write The Tryst; it was too crazy, and it's taken years.
Sorry, can I just do a little follow-up? What I found really fascinating that you seem to be saying in this process of shedding the shame is also the process of connecting, if you like, your emotions and your body. It's the physicality element. Would you say that's right? So that getting in. So, because I think so many writers and those of us who work in words, it's all up here in our head. On that journey that you made, and I'm thinking particularly the wonderful passage you read about the deer tribe. Did you find yourself in the process of writing that book becoming more in touch with your physical self?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, you see, I was doing all these, I still do. I would describe, as I have a long string of words I would now trot out to describe myself identity-wise, and one of them would be a tantrika. I'm a tantric woman, and so tantra is all about it's all about process orientated sex as opposed to goal-orientated sex, and the body and also the chakra system. And initially I was like, oh, chakras, when I started doing tantra, I was like, everybody piss off, get off me, stop hugging me, stop touching me, get off. And just get off, go away. And I came from the mainstream into this edgy world, which believed in these portals, and now I do yoga, and I'm a Buddhist, and I understand these portals really well, and how, and I'm much more in touch with my body and the whole system, yeah. But back then, no. But so yeah, I feel much more grounded and much more in my body, much more able to speak the language of the body, to speak the language of sex and sexuality, and to speak about and to write sex with a feminine language. I speak, I mean, I haven't read from the Tryst, but I talk about sex now from a spiritual and a feminine principle, always. I talk about the Kundalini rising, I talk about being lit up, so all these years and years and decades of workshops and this community has given me, put me in touch with my body and given me a language to write about sex from a female perspective, I think.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question over there.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for such an intense lecture. And I was wondering, maybe it was just my impression, but while you were reading, you were stressing the words melancholia. So you think that you are still a melancholy person, even if now you are more in touch with your body, or is just a phase that you have to overcome to arrive to this much more concrete connection with your body?
I didn't quite get the last one.
You have to say that again.
Are you saying that? I didn't really quite hear this.
Do you still define yourself as melancholic person?
Do you still find yourself a melancholic person?
Oh, no. No, it's really been a transformative, so I had this teacher, this woman I met. I feel so blessed. I was in my 40s and I just met interesting people. I met two people who have been incredibly important to me and have basically transformed my life. One, I went into Jungian psychoanalysis for about 5 years. My shrink, I never mentioned his name, it was a man. I think he changed everything for me, and it changed me as a writer, changed everything. Slow work, one-to-one, and yeah, working with dreams, working with everything, mummy and daddy, everything. But Jan Day, my teacher, a Tantra teacher, she's very well known, 10 years older than me, changed my life. And I don't know who I would be if I hadn't met her. I was having lunch with a friend 3 days ago. We went into a salt cave, we both got flu, and I looked at her, and she's in her 60s now, and I met her 10 years ago, and we both said this. We said, I don't know who we'd be if we hadn't met her. And I didn't take to it all easily, because I used to be very guarded, independent, stuck up, you name it. And Jan and I, but she has transformed my life over time. And, you know, once you spend, you know, one workshop isn't going to change your life, but many years of confronting myself, working with other people, has stretched me in a way that I feel really happy about. And yeah, I get bouts of melancholia and depression, but it's usually work-related, yeah.
I think we can take one more question. Yeah.
Hi there. You mentioned having used Craigslist, and during your reading, the need for. Yeah.
Really speak up.
You mentioned having used Craigslist, and.
You mentioned having used Craigslist.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and the need for fantasy in desire.
And the need for fantasy and desire.
Yes, yeah.
I'll try and speak over it. I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that and maybe your view of sex culture in 2017.
Okay,
age of Tinder.
could you speak a bit more about that and also about sex culture 2017?
Gosh, okay, I'll be really quick about this. So,
we have about 5 minutes.
Okay, so Tinder. I'm going to say what I think about Tinder. It is based on something called Grindr. Okay, you all know that. Do you all know that? Grindr is a dating app for gay men. Man-to-man hookups, one-on-one, no strings attached sex. Great. Cool. Nothing to say about that. What I think that Tinder does is it's kind of like the hetero version of Grindr, and it throws women into the mix of these one-on-one sex dates. Now, when I was doing these crazy Craigslist one-on-one sex dates, I was in an altered state of consciousness, and I was mad and grief-stricken. I'm also a really strong, weird person, and a writer, and mad. You know, I've got, and I had a few edgy experiences, and it's not a place to find love. And I got bored of it after about 18 months, and I was taking notes, and I've seen so many women now using Tinder. Sometimes it's interesting. I hear all sorts of stories about people actually meeting their love, but you know, things become better. But I question the platform of throwing women who are traditionally not equal, not, you know, patriarchy throws out this notion of equality. We are, even the most alpha female, even the most yang principled female, even the most predatory female has a womb and is receptive. I just question. I've seen so many women and people I've lived with go on these Tinder dates, have that one-night hookup, and really, really regret it. And in no way equal. We're not equal. It's fine for man-on-man action where men are equal, but a woman and a man coming together like that, it throws women back on themselves. We're not equal. We're not walking into this with society on our side, with this whole structure of it's societal structuring does not favour us in this hookup. And I think someone somewhere sold us this myth that we're capable of doing this. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I think it's, and the other thing that I think cultivates narcissism, cultivates shaming, and again, as I've written, the weak and the sick and the psychopaths can make themselves look the opposite on the internet. And what I really hate about Tinder is this flicking, this thing, and this and that and this and that. Who the fuck really can go like that and this and this and this? Who's got that power? Who is that? Who is that powerful to go yes, yes, no, no, yes, no, yes? It's dreadful. I think it's really hurt us. I think it's really, really hurt us. So I don't like Tinder because I think it's not for women. I don't like it. You know, I could talk about it for a good lot longer. Craigslist was kind of bargain basement dating pre-Tinder, and I've got a lot to say about that as well. Loads of men looking for women, very few women looking for men. Very few women, so I dated a sex worker once, and he said women just don't come to him. A lot of his clients were men, and he said women just don't reach out. Women, on the one hand, won't reach out, go to a sex worker, highly recommend going to a sex worker, don't recommend going to non-trained men or non-professional men who are going like this, like this, yes, no, yes, no. I think women finding our sexuality is a minefield, a real minefield. It takes a lot of bravery, it takes some luck, it takes intent, focus. We're not equal, we just aren't on this platform. Minefield. I could talk about this for a lot longer.
Just very, very quickly, do you want to just tell us what your next book will be?
Oh, God. I've written a book about a mermaid. It's about, so I've become a bit of a mermaidologist. Mermaids exist in mythology all over the world. Often they're young women who've been cursed by other women, often. Their sexuality sealed up, banished into the sea forever, cursed for eternity. Young, sexually attractive women who are stealing other women's men sometimes. And so my mermaid has been swimming around in the Caribbean Sea for thousands of years, and she gets hooked, pulled out of the sea, and rescued, and her tail falls off. She becomes a woman, and she lives and loves and resuscitates, and ... I won't, no spoilers, but that's what I've written next. Yeah,
okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So, Monique, thank you so much for what has been an absolutely amazing session with you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that everybody would like to applaud you to extend their congratulations.
Signing books.
Oh.